Great to be on. Always great to be with you, Dorothy.
Yeah, I love having you. You have so much wisdom. Where does all this come from?
Has to be the Lord because I don't take any credit for it. But the Lord just reveals, and I just want to be open to God, and He reveals. So it's I can never reproduce how like the Harbinger came, how any of the books came. It's the Lord just keeps leading. He just leads the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and that's how it comes. Each book is different. Each book is another thing from the Lord for
Well,
me.
and it is for us too. Everybody,
Yeah.
they can't wait to see what you have to say because I mean, the Harbinger, where it started, really opened the eyes to so many people. And now when you bring a word, we want to hear the next word. What's coming from God?
Yes. Yes.
Well, tell
Yes.
me, on this new book, what is it going to reveal?
Yeah, the Josiah Manifesto, the subtitle is The Ancient Mystery and Guide for the End Times. And it would be, what if God was revealing to us where we are prophetically, where we're going, what's coming ahead, how to be prepared, not just the mysteries that are going to be revealed in this book, but also what do we need to know to stand, to prevail, to thrive, to survive, to thrive in the days ahead, in our day right now, and also the end times, which is where, overall. So the Josiah Manifesto is going to open that up. More than any other book, it gives the answer. It gives an answer, which I believe, what if the Lord was pointing to a specific guide or blueprint that is for this day for his people? And what if there was an ancient calendar from God that actually gave the events of our time, what was to happen, and when they would happen, and that is what this is going to open up. The Josiah Manifesto will take the reader on this journey, this prophetic journey. All these mysteries will come together to open up then the answer. The last 100 pages are the blueprint or the end time guide, which all the mysteries open up. So I believe it's one of the most important books I could have ever written.
Well, I'm excited about it. Now, did you put something in about this war?
Yeah, well, this is something I could not have shared with you, even just a few days ago. But the amazing thing is that one of the mysteries in the Josiah Manifesto is actually, if we took this to heart, would have told you what was going to happen in a form and when it was going to happen in Israel. The night before this happened, Dorothy, I was speaking at my congregation in New Jersey, Beth Israel, and it was Friday night, and I'm sharing all about one of the mysteries from the book called the 50-year mystery. And that is that what happened 50 years ago has this parallel event. It keeps happening. 50 years ago, parallel. And I went up to 1970, 2020, then up to 1973 and 2023. So I was saying how all these events, and you see the parallel happening in many cases to the exact day, 50 years to the day. Well, I'm sharing this, and the night I'm sharing it is the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War.
Wow.
And the thing is that when Israel was attacked, and that very night, I mean, while we're here in America, that very night, the next event, the parallel event, is being set in motion in Israel, this horrific invasion. And just like, and it was to the day, it was to the weekend, it was to the Sabbath. The Yom Kippur War was a surprise attack that the one time that Israel failed to see it coming. Well, this was the next one. They called it, this was the most massive land, invasion since the Yom Kippur War. Same thing. It was also the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, where more people were killed in one day since the Holocaust. But also, just like the Yom Kippur War, it was an attack on the Sabbath. Well, this began on the Sabbath. It was an attack on a Hebrew holy day while the people were observing it. So this was as well. So it had all these parallels to Yom Kippur, and 50 years to the weekend, to the Sabbath. But this mystery is in the 50-year mystery is in the Josiah Manifesto, and it just came out last month, and it leads up to 1973 up to, this was the next event. This in 1973, this was the next event, and this is what happened. So, there are things in this book that, there are things that might even tell you what's going to happen with the next election. There are all sorts of things in the mysteries here because it says a guide to the end time. So, this is just one of them, but it actually came true. I shared it the next morning. It happened.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. And when we get down a little bit further, I want to know who's going to win the next election.
Well, we're going to be careful about that, but we can say we can give a few hints.
Yeah, a few hints, good ones. You also mentioned here something happened when you met Fidel Castro. What was that?
Well, I was asked to go to Cuba because for 1 month, Fidel Castro agreed to open up the island for 1 month to give religious freedom to Christians for 1 month. And they could have outdoor gatherings, and they have this whole thing. It was a massive thing for Cuba. It was actually on Cuban television. And I was asked by the Christians of Cuba to come and open it up with the sound of the shofar. And so I went down there and I opened it up. It was on the east coast of Cuba. And then it moved for 1 month. It moved across the island up until, and I went with it. I was ministering. A million things happened, and we can't get into it. But I ended up going, the last event was in Havana, and it was in Revolution Square. And Fidel Castro showed up for the event. It was all about Jesus. He shows up. And I was asked to go to the presidential palace, invited. And the thing is that I knew before I came there, someone had given me a prophetic word that he says, you will enter the king's palace. So I was prepared for that. And I came to Fidel Castro. I came to, on the invitation to go to into the presidential palace. And I came with 3 things to give him. One was a Bible, which were banned in Cuba. 2 was a prophetic object linked to the Jubilee of God. The Jubilee. I was led to share about the Jubilee. All over the island, they had these posters that they put up of me blowing the shofar, and it said the Jubilee is coming. And so that's what I was led to share. And so I gave him that, and then I gave him a piece of paper, a sheet with a prophetic word on it, which was also linked to the Jubilee. Now the thing is, Dorothy, that what I gave him actually gave him the time, how much time he would have left in power before his reign would end. And it would determine it to the year, to the month, to the week, to the day, to the very hour that he resigned, the very hour. And it was all linked to the Jubilee. And so what I share at the beginning of the book, this is kind of like this journey of prophetic mysteries. This has to do with everything that we just went through in America. It actually touched America. It's the mystery of the Jubilee. And the thing is, the Jubilee is not just, you get your land back, you get restored, it's all good. I mean, if you lost your land, you get it back. But there's another side of the Jubilee. If you were the one who took somebody's land, in the year of Jubilee, it's taken from you. So there's another side to the Jubilee, which is a side of restitution. Castro took power in the year of his Jubilee, it was taken from him. And the thing is that, so there is something that is going to come to America and the world, but it's affected all of our lives, that all goes back to this mystery of the Jubilee.
That's amazing. So how did he receive that you said how long his reign would be? How did he receive that?
Well, he would, I gave him the object was a shofar, which is the you sound the Jubilee. It had a scripture engraved on it. So he took it. Okay, he sent word back to thank me for the shofar, thank me for the thing. And even from his committee, they said we want to know how do we blow this, So they didn't realize, the prophetic thing was in that mystery. They didn't realize the significance, but he had a chance to really, he opened the island for 1 month, and there was revival. The revival hasn't stopped in Cuba, but he then tried to close it, and then, but then, for all those years, the American government was trying to get him out of power. They couldn't, but the Jubilee of God from Leviticus actually determined the end.
Wow.
And this has affected all of our lives, which I'll share.
Yes. Well, there's another thing. It talks about plagues coming to America. Are they going to put up something different again? I mean, we see them trying to bring COVID back, but are you doing something
No.
else?
Yeah, well, the mystery, the Josiah Manifesto. Here's the next mystery, and that is, but it goes right from that one. You got the Jubilee, and that if you took something, it's taken from you, and then you have another law of the Bible, and that is that the prophet Jeremiah, he looked over the valley of Hinnom, where the Jewish people, where the ancient Israelites, they were lifting up their children as sacrifices to the gods in that valley. And he said, because you did this, you took life, judgment's coming, life is going to be taken from you. And so the principle is that any nation that takes the lives of its children, a judgment will come upon it, any civilization. And so you put that together, and you have the Jubilee. And so the question is, when did America first start taking the lives of its children? Abortion on demand began not in 73 with Roe versus Wade. It began in 1970. That's when abortion on demand began. And so what's the Jubilee in year of that? Go 50 years in the future, it takes you to 2020. 2020 is the year of the plague. And so we took life. In the year of Jubilee, life is taken.
Wow.
And the thing is that, and one of the ways that Jeremiah said that judgment was going to come to Israel for this, he said it will come in the form in Hebrew of a dever gadol. Dever gadol means a great plague or a massive pandemic. And so it happened. And the thing is, Dorothy, the exact day that abortion began its entrance in America was actually January 20th, 1970. That's the day when the bill to legalize abortion on demand actually appeared in the New York legislature. And that would end up leading to Roe versus Wade. But that was January 20th. Well, go forward 50 years. It takes you to January 20th, 2020. Anything happen?
Yeah.
January 20th, 2020 is the official day that the plague comes to America. 50 years to the exact date, the exact day that we turned to killing children. And if you remember, Dorothy, when when it all hit us, when it all fell, was in March, and Trump went on the air and he announced that America is now quarantined. The lockdowns began falling. The stock market crashed. It was officially called a pandemic, all on one day. And the media calls it the day that changed everything. It was March 11th, 2020. Well, go back 50 years. And it takes you to March 11th, 1970. Anything happened? On March 11th, 1970, that's the exact day that America legalized the killing of children on American soil. It was 50, so we launched death, and then the death fell on us 50 years to the exact day.
That is so amazing. Now, I know this talks about a little bit later, but it talks about a calendar. There's an ancient calendar. What are you talking about that?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a hint. Then we'll get to it. We can get to it later. But that we'll say that there is an actual ancient calendar that God gave. This is over 3,000 years ago, and it actually determined every shaking that came upon America in that year when everything began with the shaking, beginning with every single one on the day. And I'll share that later, but that's a little taste of.
Well,
yeah.
That's why I wondered where you're getting. I mean, you're so precise on all the dates. Do you go back to that calendar, or you just know? Hey, you look back and March 11th. Look what happened in 1970, or.
Yeah, well, Dorothy, it's kind of like the Lord leads, once you get the first mystery, then let me look. And then behold, it's all there. All there. I'll give you another one. That is, when Jeremiah prophesied to Israel, he said, it's not only about time, this is about space. He said the judgment is going to come back to the place where you shed the children's blood. That's where you're going to get judged. That's where basically, the war came and they were killed in that place where they killed. So that's the principle. It goes back to the place where the children's blood was shed. So that was the Valley of Hinnom. Does America have a Valley of Hinnom? Yes, it's called New York. New York is not only the place that began abortion on the continent in America, but also, it is the abortion capital of this nation. To this day, more children are killed in New York, the little sliver of New York, than any other place in America. So look what happens. 50 years later on the Jubilee, we took life. Now life is taken. This plague comes. America becomes the global epicenter of this plague. At the same moment in America, one little tiny piece of land becomes the center of America, of the plague, and that is New York. And if you remember, at that time, in the world, get this, in the world, 1 out of every 3 cases were happening in America. In America, 1 out of every 2 cases were happening in the little tiny plot of land called New York. It was all there. In fact, New York passed a milestone. On April 10th of that year, it passed that there were more cases of the plague in that little plot of New York than any other nation in the world, including China. And so it was April 10th it reached the peak. Go back 50 years from April 10th. Anything happened? New York legalized abortion on April 10th, 1970. It was again 50 years to the exact date. And I'm gonna tell you another thing linked to it. You know, the Bible says that judgment comes to the gate. What's the gate of America? What's the gate of America? It's New York. And not only that, and so the thing is that you know, also when Jeremiah gave that prophecy over the Valley of Hinnom, he did it by the gate, by the Potter's Gate. They killed their children by the gate. Well, we did too. It was New York. Well, but the thing is that a gate is where something comes through. So abortion not only came to New York, it came through New York. It led to Roe versus Wade. It was New York that spread it. Well, 50 years later, we got a plague, and Dorothy, scientists just discovered when they looked at the virus and the genes of the virus, they discovered that if you had COVID, the majority of the cases of COVID came through the gate of New York, where we killed our children 50 years before. You know that, Dorothy, the majority of abortions in America from 1970 to Roe versus Wade, 73, the majority were performed in New York. And the majority of cases, if you had COVID, were from New York. You have that. And the other thing is that same year, 1970, there was one other place where abortion came into the continent, and that was the Western Gate. It was Washington State, number 2. Well, when 50 years later, the plague comes through New York, the Eastern Gate, and guess what? It comes through the Western Gate. Washington State is where patient 0 came into the land. And actually, the patient 0 came to the land 50 years to the day that abortion began, that New York began with abortion. So it's amazing. So if you had COVID, the virus had the markers on it of the 2 gates where we killed our children 50 years before.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I'll share one last thing about that, and we can go to another mystery. But one thing is that I asked in the Josiah Manifesto, I asked the Jeremiah question, and that is there a correspondence between the children that were killed and then those killed in the plague? Well, here's the thing, Dorothy. In those first 3 years, that critical 3-year window from 1970 to 1973, how many children were killed? 1.3 million children were killed in America in that 3-year window. 50 years later, we have another 3-year window, and it's the 3-year window of the plague. And that 3-year window is going to match the first window. Every year is going to be the jubilee of those first 3 years. And so how many Americans were struck down by that plague? 1.3 million, to match the 1.3 million children that we killed.
Wow, this is amazing. I want to tell you, I'm going to take a break here, Jonathan. I just want to tell you, you need to get this book. And I would like you to go ahead and replay the Josiah Manifesto. I need you to go ahead and replay the opening that we played so that you can see it. Because how all this comes out, who would have thought 1.3 million babies killed, 1.3 million killed because of COVID? We'll be right back.
Is it possible that behind the events transforming our nation and your life is a mystery that goes back to ancient times? Does this mystery reveal what the future holds? Even a blueprint to survive, to stand, and to prevail in view of what is coming in the days ahead. In his newest blockbuster, The Josiah Manifesto, the ancient mystery and guide for the end times, New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Cahn reveals the stunning mystery and what it has to do with your life. The Josiah Manifesto will take you on a prophetic journey from a Caribbean island to Washington, D.C., to a desert mountain, to the gates of America, to uncover an ancient puzzle that lies behind the events that have altered our lives. What does the future hold? And what do you need to know? It will all be revealed in the Josiah Manifesto, the ancient mystery and guide for the end times, the book you can't afford not to read. Available wherever books are sold.
I love that. It's a $25 love gift. Go to your phone, make the call right now, because you will not be sorry you did. This is just amazing to me. This book just came out. I have not had the chance to read it, but it is amazing what I'm hearing. And God is a God of order, and what everything's directly in order. Let's talk about January 6th. What happened there?
Yeah, and this is another one that came true. After I had first spoke about it, this actually came true, and that is this. I don't know if you remember, Dorothy. One of the books I've written is called The Paradigm.
Yes.
And The Paradigm actually has that the leaders of America and the events of America that have happened actually there's a prototype in the Bible. The leaders are following the prototypes of the ancient leaders of Israel when Israel was falling away from God. And one of them, the thing is, when I spoke about The Paradigm, but much of it came true after I wrote it. So, and that all goes with this mystery, and that's why it's only in the Josiah Manifesto, but it actually came true. And one of them is Donald Trump. Donald Trump, to set the stage, Donald Trump is following the prototype of an ancient leader in the Bible called Jehu. Jehu was a wild guy. He was unpredictable. You never knew what he was going to say next. You never knew what he was going to do next. That's Donald Trump. He wasn't a politician. He was a fighter. Well, Donald Trump fights with everybody. Yeah. He was prophesied over, Jehu, and then he began a race to the throne to become king of Israel. Donald Trump was actually prophesied over, and he began a race to the presidency of America. As Jehu was heading on this race, he made an alliance with the religious conservatives of his land. So while Donald Trump he made an alliance with the religious conservatives of his land. Jehu invited one of the religious conservatives of his land to come into his chariot and become his partner, his running mate in this race to the throne. So Donald Trump took one of them, a religious conservative, made him his partner, running mate in his race to the White House. Then, in order to come to power, Jehu had to stand against, there was a showdown with him, and listen, the nation's former first lady. Now, think of Trump. Trump had to stand against the nation's former first lady. Now, in the template of the Bible, in this mystery, the nation's former first lady was actually for the killing of children because she was for Baal worship. That's the offering of children. Well, the Hillary Clinton, who was the nation's former first lady, was hailed by Planned Parenthood as the abortion champion of the century. So you have all these same dynamics. Now, everybody was saying that, Hillary Clinton, all the polls showed she was going to swamp Donald Trump. But the mystery in the Bible is that the one who walks in the footsteps of Jehu is going to prevail over the one who walks in the footsteps of Jezebel. And that is the one there. And this is not political. This is just simply to reveal what is. Now, the other thing is now just to show you how exact this is, and it's going to lead into January 6th, but how exact this is that Hillary Clinton was on the national stage with her husband for 22 years. From the moment he became governor to the moment his presidency ended, 22 years. And then on her own, she went on and was in public office for 12 years. Then she stepped out, came back to run for president for 2 years. So she was on the public stage for 14 years on her own, 22 years with her husband, 14 years on her own. The ancient prototype that she is walking in the footsteps, not that she knows it, but of Jezebel. Jezebel was on the national stage with her husband Ahab for 22 years, on her own for 14 years, until the showdown with Jehu. So, I mean, like, this is so exact. So now let me tell you what happens. Jehu comes to the capital city, and he has an agenda. You know what it is? It's to drain the swamp. So he comes there, and he sees the Temple of Baal. The Temple of Baal is where they are killing their children. And he literally pulls it down. He has it destroyed. Well, Trump also was, he also became incredibly pro-life president. There's going to be a mystery, because he's going to actually, what the mystery is saying, and this is, I wrote several years ago about, yet it came true after, and that is that it means the one who walks in the footsteps of Jehu is going to be instrumental in pulling down America's Temple of Baal, which is Roe versus Wade. And that allowed us to kill 60 million children. And yet he was instrumental. It doesn't matter what you think of Trump, he was instrumental. But here's another thing. The law of this mystery is that when Jehu rises, the Temple of Baal falls to the earth. Trump began his rise to the presidency in the summer of 2015 when he announced his candidacy. 2 months later, in the same summer, there was an ancient Temple of Baal that had existed for almost 2,000 years in Syria. In the same summer, as Trump rises, the Temple of Baal falls to the ground. Literally. And that's a foreshadow of what was also going to happen with America's Temple of Baal. It was also going to fall to the ground too. It was all part of mystery. Now let's bring it to January 6th.
Yes.
Now, even this, I mean, of course, I could not have written about it before, but the paradigm foretold it, but it came true after. And that is this, that at one point in the Bible, Jehu.
Uh-oh. Wait to get it. So tell me. So let's go back.
I'll continue where it was good. It was a good time for the song. We were wondering where to put the song in. I'll go right there. And this is January 6th. This is the mystery here. Pete, we were talking before. They're in Washington. They've had all these hearings on all that stuff. We're going to tell a mystery that they have no idea of, and this is really behind it. At one point in the Bible, in the account of Jehu calls for people to come to the capital city. Okay. January 6th, Trump calls for that. Then the people of Jehu go down, and they go down to a great Capitol building in the Bible. It's a great Capitol. And then the people of Trump, I mean, many people they go down to the Capitol building. At the time, there are proceedings going on in Jehu. There are proceedings going on in that building. So there are proceedings going on in the Capitol building. Then in the story of Jehu, the people of Jehu surround the Capitol building right outside. So in January 6th, many of the people there of Trump, they surround the Capitol building. Then at one point in the account of Jehu, the people of Jehu, they storm the Capitol building, the great Capitol building. They go inside. Now, listen, this is not giving any editorial about condoning anything or not. It's simply revealing. Okay, so that happened. Then, on January 6th, many of them go inside the building. Now, there is so much to this, Dorothy, and really the significance and what it actually meant. But here's the thing. At the end of that week, the Capitol Police announced how many people they had arrested on site. It was the first arrest on site. That would be the beginning. And it made headlines. They said, we have arrested 80 people on site for this Capitol, 80 people. Go to the Bible, and you go to the account, and you'll find a Hebrew word. The word is shmonim ish. And that speaks about the people who went into the Capitol building in the time of Jehu. But in English, it translates to 80 people.
Oh my goodness.
The same number, everything. And so this was actually part of the battle. One of the sections of the mysteries in the Josiah Manifesto, it says Jehu and the Temple of Baal. And the thing is, there's a battle going on with this because we said that Jehu was the one who pulled down the Temple of Baal, and in America it's linked to Roe versus Wade. Well, that was our temple, and which we killed children. Well, Trump was the one who literally was responsible. Again, whatever you think about it, he's the one who was responsible for pulling down that temple of Roe versus Wade by appointing, like Jehu appointed men to pull it down. Trump appointed 3 people to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Remember the Kavanaugh hearings?
Yes.
And all hell broke loose on Capitol Hill because it was over the issue of abortion. They didn't want him in there. At that same moment, a strange object appears in Washington, D.C. in front of the Capitol building while they're having the hearings and all the fights going on. The object is the Arch of Baal from the Temple of Baal that fell when Trump began his rise. It's a reproduction of that temple. So it's a spiritual war going on between Baal and the forces of Baal and the forces of Jehu. And so this is all part of a mystery that's going to lead to ultimately even the overturning of Roe versus Wade was all part of a mystery, an ancient mystery that God set in motion.
Well, is that the mysterious object that came from the Middle East?
That was yeah. That
they
was what
sent
appeared.
it over?
They recreated it and sent it over, and they had it appear at that very moment. And it's not like, I don't know that they even knew what they were doing, but the spirits do.
Timing,
I did last year we were on talking about the return of the gods. There are spirits, there are gods. This is Baal.
Yes.
And so there's a war in America over the children, over the life of the children, over the future of the children, and we're in it.
Wow. Well, what does Roe versus Wade play in the Josiah Manifesto?
Yeah, it wasn't just the abortion coming into America in 1970. It's also Roe versus Wade. But Roe versus Wade didn't start in 73. It started in that same year, 1970. So the jubilee of Roe versus Wade, the beginning of Roe versus Wade, is 2020. When that plague came on America, it was the jubilee of Roe versus Wade beginning. And actually, Roe versus Wade actually began in late January of 1970. So late January of 2020 is when the plague came into America. And so the thing is but the jubilee is not just restitution, it's redemption. And so we're going to actually see another mystery is going to be at work, Dorothy, through these 3 years of the plague and the 3 years of this. The 3 years of the plague were the jubilee of Roe versus Wade as well, because Roe versus Wade began in 1970 and it came to its conclusion in 1973. So the 3 years of the plague matched that. Well, while all that was happening, God was setting in motion a jubilee in redemption. And that is the overturning of this horrible thing that began the killing of 60 million children. And you know what? When you take the jubilee of Roe versus Wade, it was sent to the Supreme Court in the summer of 1970. Go forward 50 years, takes you to the summer of 2020. Guess what? The summer of 2020, another case is sent to the Supreme Court that is going to be the undoing of Roe versus Wade.
Thank God.
It is sent, Dobbs versus Jackson, it is sent on the jubilee of Roe versus Wade being sent. Then Roe versus Wade was taken up by the court, received by the court. They chose to do it in May of 71. Okay, go 50 years later. May of 2021 is the jubilee of the taking up. In that very month, the other case is taken up by the Supreme Court on the jubilee of Roe versus Wade taken up. Then Roe versus Wade gets its hearing before the Supreme Court in December of 1971, okay? Go to the Jubilee, and that takes you to December 2021. The case that's going to undo Roe versus Wade gets its hearing in December of 2021, the Jubilee of Roe versus Wade's hearing. And if you remember, Dorothy, before this case, the ruling came out, it was leaked to the press. Remember, it was a big storm. Mm-hmm. Well, go back 50 years, and just before Roe versus Wade came out, it was leaked to the press. So even the leak is part of the mystery, even the leak. And the thing about it is, when you want to see how this all goes, go back to the book of Leviticus. Yes. Leviticus tells you when the Jubilee is. And it says you will count 7 times 7 years, 49 years, then comes the 50th year. And something to note, just so people have clarity on it, when you turn 50, it's not your 50th year. You enter your 51st year.
Yes.
Your 50th year is from 49 to 50. That's your 50th year. Well, that's the Jubilee year is the 50th year. So when is the Jubilee of Roe versus Wade, the ruling, when it all was finished? We said it started in 70, but the ruling, the Jubilee year began on January 22nd, 2022, and goes to January 22nd, 2023. That's the Jubilee year of Roe versus Wade. It was right, according to Leviticus, those are the parameters. If something's going to happen, it's got to happen in those parameters of the Jubilee. Well, right in the middle of those parameters from Leviticus, God overturned Roe versus Wade in the Jubilee of Roe versus Wade. So this whole mystery, this 3 years of Roe versus Wade were the 3 years of the plague. And let me throw in something else. This has to do with, the book of Esther. If you read the book of Esther, there's an evil decree that is issued by Haman. And it's an evil decree to cause death and destruction. And the Bible says it was linked to the Hebrew date Adar 13. The evil decree, Adar 13. Well, that's the 13th day of the 12th month of the Bible's year. 13th day of the 12th month, day of evil decree to bring death and destruction. Roe versus Wade was heard before the Supreme Court on December 13th, the 13th day of the 12th month, the day of the evil decree to bring death and destruction. But there's another decree in the book of Esther, and that's when Esther and Mordecai issue a decree to overturn, to undo the evil decree, to nullify the evil decree. And that was issued on Sivan 23. That's the 23rd day of Sivan, Sivan 23. In fact, Dorothy, that day became a day, every year the Jewish people pray for God to overturn evil decrees on Sivan 23.
Wow,
well,
wow.
The case that was going to overturn Roe versus Wade, the evil decree of the 13th day of the 12th month, that case was Dobbs versus Jackson, was sent to the Supreme Court on June 15, 2020. But on the Bible's calendar, the day was Sivan 23, the day of the decree that will overturn the evil decree. So, I mean, God is just
It just
amazing.
gets better. I bet you have fun sitting there and saying, oh my goodness, look at this.
Yes. I'm the first one, Dorothy.
I know.
People say, well, how do you react to this? I'm the first one to say, oh, Lord, it doesn't surprise me, but it wows me.
It wows
In other words,
you.
it doesn't surprise me that God does it, but when he does it, it's just still amazing. I mean, so.
It is amazing. Now, coming out of kind of that, and Amy
Yes.
Barrett, she had a big play in this, didn't she? Amy
Yes,
Coney
and
Barrett.
there's a part in the Josiah Manifesto, the mystery of the child of the Nile, and this is this. Here's the mystery. The first war against babies, killing children, took place in Egypt, and that's when they decreed all the Hebrew baby boys are going to be thrown into the Nile River,
Right.
and so they were. But one Hebrew baby boy is also in the river, but he survives, and his name is Moshe, or Moses. He will grow up to be the one who will break the power that tried to kill him and all those babies, the power of Egypt. So the principle is the one who they tried to kill, who was born in the middle of the slaughter, is going to grow up, and he's going to be the one to overturn that evil power. Well, does America have a child of the Nile? And the answer is yes. Is there a child born in that initial slaughter of babies, but who survives to grow up to do something gigantic? And it was a girl, and her name was Amy. And she was born, Amy Barrett was born right in the midst of that 3-year period of the slaughter of the babies. She could have been killed, but she was not. And when she was born right as Roe versus Wade was in the Supreme Court to be heard. She was actually born in between the two hearings of Roe versus Wade. So she's linked to all the, she would end up then being lifted up to the Supreme Court by Jehu. Jehu, who's got to pull down the temple of Baal, which is Roe versus Wade, lifts up this child of the Nile who was born under it. And she is the first Supreme Court justice to be born at the time when it was legal to kill her as a child. First one. And she is the one who's going to cast the deciding vote. It's only one vote that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And, Trump put in 3 people. He only got Amy Barrett just at the last moment of his presidency, got her in. She is going to cast the vote. And when does she do it? She casts the vote in her year of Jubilee. When she reaches her year of Jubilee, her 50th year of life, she cast the vote that's going to overturn Roe versus Wade in Roe versus Wade's Jubilee. And on top of that, she was lifted up to to go to the Supreme Court by the American Jehu in 2020, which is abortion's year of Jubilee. And then she overturns it in her Jubilee, and it gets overturned, it gets ruled down in Roe versus Wade Jubilee. So, I mean, you could not put this together. You could not put this together.
So amazing. Now, let me tell you, there's a lot of things left here, and we don't have a lot of time. So I just want you to go through some of the different factors, the different things that you would like to have us know.
Okay. A few. There's so much. Of course, we can only touch on the mysteries in the Josiah Manifesto, but you're getting a taste of it. The thing is, a few things. One, there's something called the Phineas factor, and I'll say this. There's a time in the Bible when Israel sins and a plague comes to Israel. If you remember that. God raises Phineas, one man does an act of righteousness that turns the plague away. Now I'm thinking about this, and I look, we had 3 years of COVID, but there was one moment when the plague was at its peak, and suddenly it collapsed. And people didn't realize this. In January of 2022, the plague was actually at its peak. It would have gone on for years. In fact, not only was it at its peak, it was 3 times higher than the number 2 peak. That it was going to go on for years. Something happened. Something happened in January that changed. In January, beginning of February. What happened was, the Supreme Court didn't overturn. The voting wasn't in June when the ruling came down. It voted much earlier, and the decision that was going to overturn Roe versus Wade was written by Judge Alito in January of 2022. That was the decision that was going to overturn it. He wrote it out. And he writes it out, and all of a sudden, the plague that was at its peak then collapses. Within a few weeks, it's 1/8 of what it was and never came back. And not only that, Dorothy, the death rate also collapsed, and the CDC said the date that it reached its peak and then it collapsed, the week ending January 22nd. That January 22nd, 2022 was the day that began the Jubilee of Roe versus Wade. That's the last day, and then it collapsed. There's so much to this, but let me bring it to a kind of convergence. And that is what is this all about? All these mysteries come together with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was the biggest altar we had in America. Yes. On that altar, we killed 60 million children. God broke that altar. He broke the altar. That's why if you look at the cover, you're going to see it is a broken altar here. The broken altar is a sign from God. In the Bible, this is one of the most powerful signs in the Bible, the sign of the broken altar. When Israel sinned and then they repented, they broke the altars of the gods. And so the sign of the broken altar is a sign of the potential for revival, number one. Number two, it is the sign of Josiah. That's why it's called the Josiah Manifesto. Because there's one man more than any other man is linked to the sign of the broken altar. That's Josiah. His birth was prophesied over the sign of an altar that God broke apart. And when he rose to power, he was a righteous king, and his nation was in sin, apostasy. They were offering up children, sexual immorality, gender confusion. And it was actually back then. And they had altars of all these things, and he broke those altars. He broke the altars of child sacrifice. He broke the altars of gender confusion. He broke the altars of sexual immorality. He broke the altars of all those things, and he brought revival. And so the sign of Josiah, what it's saying is, here's the revelation that we are now standing at the Josiah moment. America is at the Josiah moment. And the Josiah moment is that Israel was about to be judged, but God gave it a last chance for revival. We are standing at that moment between judgment, on the eve of judgment, or revival on the other hand. It's a choice between judgment or revival. And the thing is, so this is what opens up the last 100 pages of the book is the manifesto, is the guide for the end times. And how so? How did Josiah stand in a day of such evil? How did he overcome it? Not just stand, how did he actually transform it? What were the secrets of Josiah? One man changed the course of his nation. One man. And so how did he do it? What was the Josiah strategy? What was the Josiah secret? What was the powers of Josiah? That is what the Josiah Manifesto in the last part is going to open up. How to overcome, how to stand in the last days, how to prevail, how to protect your family, what to do when there's persecution, when the government tells you you are going to bow down and disobey God. What do? How do you overcome it? What are the secrets? How can we have revival in the last days? Because the last mystery of the book, it's actually called the last mystery. We won't be able to get into it, but to say, Dorothy, on the very day that I blew the shofar in Cuba to begin that first mystery, it all comes that very night. God did something. He manifested a sign, which I can't even begin to go into, about the last days and about his power in the last days, and even revival in the last days. He manifested it before hundreds of people at night. It was incredible. And so there can be revival. This could be our greatest hour. If the dark gets darker, it is time for the lights to get brighter. Josiah was not overcome by the darkness. He overcame the darkness with the light.
With the light.
You know, Josiah was not just reacting to the world. What are they going to do next? Josiah knew he was on earth for a mission to act up. He was an agent of God, an agent of heaven on earth. We are to be agents of heaven on earth in the last days. God's purposes are never finished. You know, and so we've got a job to do. It doesn't matter what the government says. It doesn't matter what the culture does. We've got a job, and the job is even more powerful now. You know, there's a mystery, Dorothy, that the end of the age is like the beginning of the age. At the end of, the beginning of the age, you had Israel in the world. At the end of the age, you have Israel in the world. In the beginning of the age, you had Jewish people in Jerusalem. End of the age, you got that too. In the beginning of the age, you had an anti-Christian pagan culture. That's Book of Acts didn't have a Christian culture. They were in a pagan anti-Christian culture. Well, we've got it now. It's coming back to that now. The world is returning. Well, that means it's time for us to return to where we were at the beginning of the age, and that is the Book of Acts. That is the power of the Spirit of God. Yes. That is the power to be a Paul, to be a Peter, to be the giants who actually changed the course of human history. So listen, this is, I was led, I'm going to tell you a little secret here, Dorothy, that when last time we spoke of the Return of the Gods, which is still going forth. But the day that I finished the Return of the Gods, the day I'm talking about the gods, I'm talking about the altars, the day I finished it, God broke the altar of Molech. That was the day that he overturned Roe versus Wade. On that day, I was with our friend Barry Stone. God broke the altar on the day I put the last word of that book. And that's when the Lord led me that you now are going to give a book that's going to give hope, and it's going to give a way and to stand, and a blueprint and a guide for what is coming. And that is what the Josiah Manifesto is.
I'll tell you what, that is amazing. And I can't personally wait to get that book, because everybody's wondering, now we got the war in Israel, is it coming here? Or is this the last days? Is this the Ezekiel war? There's so many questions, but this book will help you work through those questions. Who's going to be the next president? Why was Trump not allowed to be president? Many questions.
Yes.
And you'll get them, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I was led that, again, to be called, the ancient mystery and the guide for the end times. But I didn't know, Dorothy, I got to tell you, it's like, not that I know all these things, it's God who knows it. I don't, but the thing is but I was led, I'm telling you that we started talking at the beginning of the program, kind of bringing it back home. The day before this happened in Israel, it's the night before, and I'm led to speak about this mystery from this book, which is the 50-year mystery, which comes to its next step on that very day, that very next day. I wasn't even thinking about it. I mean, but God was, so I didn't even know how many things were to come true. And I don't even know how many more things are in the book that are going to come true. But God does, and
Yes.
that's why this book has come out right now.
Well, I've never seen you write something that hasn't come true. And so
Praise God.
that's why people look to you, because we know the word, but the timing we don't always get right. And so I believe this book, the Josiah Manifesto, will help you. Oh, it's a wonderful book, Jonathan.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. And all they have to do, well, you have it, but
Yeah.
you just notice this, the broken altar, that's the sign. And that's why that's on the cover of it. But thank you. I pray that people get it, not just for themselves, but for people in their life. Because even if you're not a believer, this is like, whoa, wait a minute. It all happened. And if you have believers in your life who need to become strong for what is coming and standing, get it for them too. Don't just get it for yourself, get it for them too. They need to help them as the guide for what they need to do.
And that's a special offer we gave you at 25. It's more than that, but on a retail. But I'm just so thankful, Jonathan. And I want you all to keep him in your prayers, because
Thank you.
this is a modern day prophet that God put here, and that God speaks to him and tells him, look at this, and he confirms it with his word every time. Wow, it's very, very powerful. Go to your phone and make that call. We're going to let Jonathan go. He has other things he.
Hello, xin chào cả nhà. Hôm nay mình sẽ quay lại và nói về chủ đề cách bảo quản về mực xăm và hạn sử dụng mực xăm được bao lâu. Vì hạn sử dụng của mực xăm được bao lâu nó không phải là vấn đề của nguyên một người thợ xăm, mà cả về người tiêu dùng nữa. Vì nó sẽ ảnh hưởng đến chất lượng, kết quả, quá trình sau khi phun xăm thẩm mỹ. Bên cạnh đó thì làm sao để bảo quản được cái mực xăm này tốt ấy, thì nó cũng rất là quan trọng đối với người thợ xăm của chúng ta nhé. Thì mực xăm thẩm mỹ được sử dụng thường ấy thì để đưa cái lớp mực này vào cái tầng thượng bì của da để tạo lên màu sắc như mong muốn cho môi mày này, hoặc là hình xăm. Màu mực thì vô cùng là đa dạng. Dù bạn có yêu cầu là màu sắc đỏ này, hoặc là màu hồng, màu đen hay màu gì đấy, thì đều để đáp ứng cái màu đấy thì mực ở dưới da nó phải tồn tại khá là lâu, bởi thành phần của nó cái quan trọng nữa là cái thành phần của nó là các chất để giữ màu. Để mà giữ được nhiều, để duy trì được lâu ấy, thì chúng ta còn phải học cách chăm sóc bảo quản. Ngoài ra thì kết quả thẩm mỹ thì phụ thuộc rất lớn với cái hạn sử dụng của mực xăm, và cái thành phần của nó thì nó sẽ không thể nào mà ví dụ như chúng ta để như thế này chẳng hạn, nó cũng sẽ chỉ có hạn sử dụng thôi, không thể nào mà những cái thành phần trong mực xăm này nó có thể duy trì lâu được. Vì nếu như mà dùng mực mà đã hết hạn chẳng hạn thì sẽ gây ra vấn đề về nhiễm trùng, lở loét, và gây ra vấn đề về hình dạng và màu sắc cho đôi môi hoặc là mày, hoặc là những cái hình xăm như thế này, nó sẽ không được giữ được đúng cái màu gốc của nó nhé. Chính vì thế khi mà tiến hành phun xăm thẩm mỹ, bạn cần phải đảm bảo về cái hạn sử dụng mực. Thì mực xăm ấy thì nó có đối với mực xăm thì mực xăm vô cơ thì trong thành phần nó có chứa kim loại và chất dẫn, nên mực xăm vô cơ có hạn sử dụng khá là lâu. Nếu bảo quản tốt có thể duy trì từ 2 đến 3 năm, và đặc biệt là từ sản phẩm từ thương hiệu nổi tiếng thì bạn cần lưu ý rằng hạn sử dụng mực còn nằm ở trong lọ, chứ không phải là mực đã được tạo ra đưa lên da. Nếu đã tiến hành sử dụng mực thì Màu môi và chân mày sẽ được bảo quản lưu được màu sắc từ 1 đến 3 năm. Còn mực hữu cơ là hạn sử dụng của mực hữu cơ thì nó ngắn hơn vô cơ. Nguyên nhân vì thành phần của nó chiết xuất từ tự nhiên, ít chất bảo quản và chất lưu giữ màu. Loại mực này có thể giữ được từ 1 đến 2 năm trong điều kiện chưa mở nắp và nhiệt độ thường. Nếu đã mở ra ấy, nếu mà loại mực đã mở ra và sử dụng rồi thì chỉ giữ được trong khoảng đã mở ra và sử dụng thì mực thừa chỉ giữ trong khoảng 1 tháng, bao gồm cả loại mực xăm vô cơ hay hữu cơ. Theo các chuyên gia thì khi bạn mở lắp lọ mực, không khí sẽ tràn vào bên trong. Dù bạn có đậy kín nắp thì cái chất của không khí đấy nó cũng sẽ làm ảnh